feeding the 5,000. And after that happens, after Jesus feeds the 5,000, Jesus is almost to the situation where he is such a hero, a rock star, a celebrity, whatever word you want to use to the people, that they are ready to crown him king. And by crown someone king, I mean a literal put the crown on your head, put the robe around you, give you the scepter, give you the big seat, give you all of that. But that's not what Jesus intended. So I want us to think about that first before we start, if we go any further. Why would the people have wanted to crown Jesus king? Okay. Okay. So you've got somebody who has shown themselves capable of doing a lot of different things. He definitely has support from a majority of the population. Anybody who's going to be a leader, if you can't get more than 50% of the vote, it's going to be hard for you to have much support. But Jesus there's people that, of course, were against him. But what do we notice every week? The crowds are what? They're larger and larger. Now, that's why why would Jesus not want this crown and robe? Wasn't his mission. Say it again. It's not going to be an earthly kingdom. Right. You're crowning someone who's already king, but not in the political sense, I guess. Right. And maybe the title that comes with it as well. Ben?
It would take away from his main mission. Being king, he's not interested. His main mission is to do this. He's
right.
Not interested in worldly fame or anything. The only thing he's interested in is that would be a distractor from his mission.
And not only that, we'd also say that you mentioned it a minute ago, Rome was in charge. Well, they're not just going to walk away and say, you can have it. How is one king going to overthrow another king? It's going to have to be through bloodshed and through army. And now all of a sudden, we are way down the line from what Jesus was there to do. And so that first bullet point up there is the people are this close to it. But Jesus, that's not what he was wanting. Go ahead. Right. Mm-hmm. Sure.
Not only that, he needs the Rome. Without the Roman mail system, without the Roman road, the political system, and all those other things, the gospel wouldn't spread nowhere near.
Right. You can use the resources at your disposal there too. So Jesus, we'll see tonight, sends his disciples to the boat, tells them to go to the other side of the sea. That they leave. And so he tells them, when I say other side here, more than anything, we're just getting away from the crowd for right there. But then he will deal with the multitude of people. And then he alone goes up to a mountain to pray. And we'll see that here as we go. Where we are at this point. Now, talk a little bit about walking on the water here real quick before we get into it. And I'm repeating something that we have talked a bit about already, but the Sea of Galilee, because of its location and because of the hills that were around it, and sort of swoop down. We've already seen this in some lessons, that a boat can get sort of carried away really quickly when you're out on the Sea of Galilee. So this is not necessarily safe waters. What we're going to see is these apostles that Jesus has sent out onto the boat. They're attempting to row across the sea, but they come upon this wind is there, whipping the waves, tossing the boat, as you can imagine. And by late evening, they've went about 3 or 4 miles. When I was reading this and sort of researching this, I thought about, the only thing I could think of was years ago, Dad and I, along with Dad's brother David and his son, went to Minnesota for a week-long camping trip with some friends of his that lived up there. And it was, there was a lot of canoeing. And the last day, as we were coming out, it was windy in every direction. And if we went straight, it blew the wind. And when the river turned, the wind blew this way. And at times, I think we had turned back this way, and the wind was still blowing in our face. And if anybody's been in a canoe or in a boat like that, there's sometimes that you're just going against it at all times right there. And so it's hard to make progress because Dad and I were in much better shape, I guess. But if you put the paddle down for just a second, your boat was going backwards. Well, think about being not on a river, but being on a big body of water like this, and you're in a storm and you're trying to make this progress, and you're not really getting anywhere. Not only that, now Jesus is not with you. Now, he's going to come on the scene in a minute, but the person that's sort of been with you that's kind of saved the day before isn't there. You're out in the middle of the water. With our picture for the week, this is relatively new from 1888 of the Religion Museum of the History of Religion in St. Petersburg, Russia. Can't hear? Okay. I'm sorry, short. Oh, that's right. Has it been off the whole time? I'm super loud. I'm fully aware of my loudness right there. No, I think the battery's dying on its what's. Shorty, can you hear me? All right, good deal. Yeah, I'll change the batteries on that here in just a second. I think we didn't start the camera on time. Microphone's going out. Usually it happens in threes. So Tom lost his hair. I mean, we had all this happen tonight. So it's just been one bad thing after another. But anyway, this is where we'll be here this evening. Like I said, we're going to be in John and Matthew, a little bit of John, a little bit more with Matthew. But let's start with John chapter 6, and just simply verse 15. Maria, since it's your birthday tomorrow, you want to start the reading off for us right there. Now, I do think, we talked about this a minute ago, but I think this is an interesting sort of way of thinking about it. I don't believe I have any interest in being a king or a politician of any kind. But if there's a million people sort of chanting your name, it might be kind of hard to say no to it, right? But Jesus here is realizing that the situation here is about to get maybe out of hand a little bit. And so he will kind of realizes there, I guess you would say, what the potential problems that could come from it. We already talked about this a little bit, but why do they want to take him by force? We just read. He wasn't willing to do it, but they thought he should do it. But so we're going to make somebody do it. And so that was this. But I don't know what goes through your head reading that verse that Maria just read. But when it says he perceived that they were about to take him by force, well, you're going to be, I think of almost like a kidnapping kind of thing, or almost maybe an arrest. But he's going to have to avoid this. So just another in a sort of litany of problems that are coming right there. All right, let's go a little further then, because I just wanted to see that verse there. This is Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 and 23. Tom, do you care to read that one, sir? All right, so we'll look at that. Tells me to get in the boat and go before him to the other side. I looked at this because I kind of wanted to see, because we've been all over the Sea of Galilee, and I kind of wanted to see where would this have taken place. And I looked at 5 different maps, and the answer seemed to be in 5 different places. There was no real consistent answer as to where on the Sea of Galilee this took place. In part, it's because of the sort of transient nature of Jesus and the people. They were moving a lot. So it's hard to know where the starting point was, because they just fed the 5,000, but now they're moving in a different direction. And so the question, then not only that, when you look at the boat, what did we read is, what did we talk about just now that was happening to the boat? Were they going in a straight line, smooth all the way? And so it's hard to know exactly where this was. So I started with a map, and then I didn't like it. And I got another map, and I didn't like it because they seemed like they kind of, they contradicted each other. But Jesus puts the disciples into the boat. But then Jesus does something that we will see him do a few times. What does Jesus do after he puts the disciples in the boat and after he deals with the multitude? What does he then do? He said he went up to a mountain to pray. Now, the word mountain here is used to describe any time. There's no mountains really around that area, but it's a higher area that they would have been. But now the question, why do you think he did that? Why would Jesus go up to a mountain to pray? Remembering what we've sort of experienced in the last week or so, but also what we've looked at tonight. That makes sense. A little bit of peace, a little bit of quiet. May have needed the apostles to be alone for a little bit. Huh? Yeah. Absolutely. Other thoughts? Right. I think so. Yeah. And I think, Boo, you were walking around to the edge of that, and I think, and add a little bit more to what she was saying. He'd been in this situation that was clearly pretty hectic, kind of insane. We see Jesus pray late in his life in the garden. He says, "Not my will, but thy will be done." But I think at this point, if you're Jesus, there's probably some question, what is the next step? Because the people that seem to like me the most want me to be something that I'm not really supposed to be. That would be difficult, right? What is my mission? What am I supposed to do? If I'm supposed to walk this way and I'm supposed to bring these people with me, but the people I'm bringing want me to steer over this way, am I right? Are they right? Sometimes we got to get some clarification in that. Does that make sense to anybody? Do you have thoughts on that?
Jesus got the power to get the cross. He can do all that. He can just show the people to go on. And, but, like you said, it's your will, not mine.
Right.
So I think, this was a temptation for Jesus.
I think I would agree with that. Any other thoughts on this as well? Okay. Let's go a little bit further. Back to John. This is John 6, verses 16 and 17. Annette, do you care to read this? All right, so they've been sent to get on the boat. They've been sent to go away, but Jesus is not with them right here. So let's think about those questions that for just a second. We said, first of all, what time, Annette just read, what time of day was it when they got into the ship? It's evening, right? It's dark right there. I added this question, what was their hopeful destination? What was the town that they were sort of aiming toward? Capernaum, yeah. And we've seen, I feel like I've shown that picture of the synagogue at Capernaum like 5 times already, but that was almost like a home base for Jesus in this early. So it makes sense that you would maybe go back to that location. And so that's where they're trying to go. But we'll notice there Jesus is not with them. Now, that's the combination of 2, Matthew 14, 24, and John 6 and 19. Mom, do you care to read this one? All right. So let's think about those two verses right there. I'll give you 30 seconds and read both of those two verses again. And we'll play this game that we've played a few times. I want you to be one of the apostles in this story. So read this to yourself, but you are one of the apostles. All right. At it. You've played that role. I want what is going through your head at this moment? Imminent death.
I've always thought that Peter and James and John, seafarers.
Yeah.
They probably looked at Matthew, tax collector, but he can't roll with it.
Right. Yeah. There's probably some. We'd be doing a lot better if you weren't so bad. If you're over here counting money when we're supposed to be paddling here. What? Any other thoughts? Sure. Yeah. But I think so if he's walking on land. But I think if somebody's walking on water, that might make you a little bit more. So, right. So the Bible describes the wind here in Matthew 14:24 as what? The word contrary is a perfect use of the word contrary, because contrary means what? So it's kind of bad, but I don't know that it necessarily means it's knocking you straight over. But it's something you got to deal with because it's a little different than what it normally is, right? You all know contrary people. I mean, how many of you people have you ever heard, man, she's just contrary? What does that, was it you? Lucille and Linda both pointing at each other. I don't know what that wind's about to pick up over there too. So, but when you describe somebody as being contrary, it's kind of an error because it's nothing the way you think it should go, right? Well, if you're on a boat trying to get from point A to point B and you went 3 miles and forever, took all this time, contrary winds are what I described with Dad and I a while back. That when I turn this way, you'd think if I go this way, it's eventually going to be behind me. But there are people in our lives that are contrary. That if you say I'm going to go over here, that's a bad idea. He said, well, okay, well, I'll come over here where you are. That's a bad idea. Well, which one do you want? Well, I would imagine that the people in the boat were thinking the same thing. Why is this wind blowing every way for us? So it's a challenge for what they are facing right then, a contrary wind. We said they had went 3 to 4 miles. How would you describe this progress? Very slow, okay? Very slow. Okay, so I said, would you consider this good progress? Most of us would say no, right? And so if you're having to work longer at a task that you're supposed to do, how many of us get frustrated? This should have took an hour and now it's taking 2. Do we get frustrated in those situations? We all do, right? What happens when we get frustrated? Do what? Don't think. So sort of lose that thinking. How do we sometimes react to other people when we're in that level of frustration? We get aggravated at that. We maybe come across as hateful. Maybe we're the contrary one by this point. And in many ways, we're sort of not ourselves, maybe as it were. So you can imagine we're probably pretty close to what Dad was saying a minute ago, a little bit of infighting in the boat. We should have, if he'd had 12 fishermen, we'd been there already. And if they all probably are coming up with things along those lines. All right, let's finish the story here, but then we've got quite a bit to talk about afterwards. Boo, do you care to read? This is Matthew 14, 25 to 33. It's a lengthier read, and we'll look at several parts of this as we go. Go ahead. Okay. So let's break down this series of verses right here. Verse 25. When does Jesus come to the disciples? What does it say in verse 25? When did it say they came? The fourth watch. Okay. That may not be a term familiar to you, but you can see up there are 4 watches at night. There is a 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. There is a 9 to midnight, midnight to 3 a.m., and 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Fourth watch is 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Okay? I want you all to think about for just a second. How many of you have ever woke up sometime between 3 and 6 in the morning and you've thought, I have no idea where I am right now? Because we've been sleeping so good, and you're just kind of, that's probably the time that the most of us, if we've not already gotten up because that's for work or whatever, that's when we're sort of the deadest, right? If you ask me to watch something from 6 to 9 o'clock, I can handle that pretty good. Why could we handle 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. pretty well? That's when most of us are awake. We're right there. What about 9 to midnight? How many of you are up between 9 and midnight? Lucille and I know. We know how this is. Now, some of y'all might not handle 9 to midnight too well. I don't know. But the rest of us, we might be able to handle that. Now, midnight to 3, that's getting a little late. If you're Jimmy, maybe it's not. But, some of us, we might have went to a ball game or to a show, and we got home at 12:30 or what. I know what that time is like. But that 3 to 6, now I'm about half asleep. I'm pretty cranky. Wind and waves are being contrary. Nobody's paddling good. And all of a sudden, what do we see? Well, y'all know the answer was Jesus, but they said it was a what? When I was little, I could have almost guaranteed that if you laid in my bed at our house on 1295 and you looked into the living room over top of the recliner, there was a ghost that danced around right up there. I knew it was. And the later at night, the more ghosty he got over there, right? Well, what it was we had vehicles driving by, we had trees, and those leaves were dancing on that wall. And I thought, it took me a while to figure it. Y'all know what it's like. But at 6 o'clock at night, if I looked in there, there's nothing happening. But we sort of think oddly, like we were talking about a minute ago, when we're in these situations that we're not really supposed to be in right there. They reacted by thinking Jesus was what? Like a ghost. All right. How did Jesus respond to their recognition of him? Verse 27. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Sure. Right. Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's it. And he makes a good point. The amount of, we take light for granted today, but back then it would have been very dark. And on a stormy night, it gets darker like quicker. It wouldn't have been a lot of moon or anything. What is Jesus' response to their, they say, it's a ghost. Well, how does Jesus respond to that? Verse 27. He said, be of good cheer. It is I, which is poor grammar, by the way, but it is I. Be not afraid, right? Right. Right. We're good. We're good. Okay. But now, let's go a little further. What does Peter ask Jesus? And what was the response given? Okay. Said, if it's you, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. Jesus responds, how? Verse 29. He says, come. All right. So pretty straightforward. So now it's up to Peter. Now he's the one that's back in the swimming pool like when we were little, trying to step in and see what's going to happen, right? We already know the story, but let's go a little bit further. I want you to describe the experience of Peter as he walked toward Jesus. What was Peter experiencing right there? Okay. Okay. So I put verses 29 and 30 with this answer because the experience changes from verse 29 to 30. If I simply said, describe Peter's experience from verse 29, you would have said he walked on the water to go toward Jesus, which is pretty fascinating. I'd call it a miracle. That's what it is. But verse 30 then, things change. It says that he saw that the wind was what? He saw that the wind was boisterous. That's not the same as contrary, but boisterous is loud and active or whatever it might would be. And then he was what? He was afraid. And when he becomes afraid, what starts happening to him? Starts to sink, okay? Because like Mom, you said a minute ago, instead of focused on Jesus, which was Jesus had come and he took off. But now it's like, whoa, kind of windy. Oh, kind of loud. Oh no, I'm sinking. And all of this probably happened really quick because if you don't think so, try walking in a straight line and see how fast it is. You can fall off that line real quick. Try walk on a beam or walk on a post or something like that. That is a quick thing that can happen. And so Peter sort of experiences all of this. So when Peter says, I am sinking, how did Jesus respond? Stretched out his hand, does what? Catches him. Says, "Oh ye." Old King James says, "Oh ye of little faith." Right? I think "Oh ye" is better than "Oh you" right there. "Oh ye of little faith." But what's interesting to me, and I don't know that I've ever thought about that until I was preparing for this. Jesus was close enough to Peter to grab him by the hand, which tells me Peter wasn't very far away. He was close enough to be able to reach out and grab him, but Peter lost focus and lost faith, I guess it were, in that brief little bit. Is there a lesson there for us? Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Absolutely. Right. Yeah. Right. And that's correct. So after Jesus and Peter get in the boat, verse 32, what happens? The wind stopped. Now, how comforting would it be after you have paddled for hours and you've went essentially nowhere, you fought a contrary wind, how comforting would it be for that wind to sort of die down? A lot of us probably don't like being on a boat anyway. We talked about that a few weeks ago. But when it's smooth and flat, and we're going to be able to ease on over to our final destination, we're going to like that a whole lot better, right? And so that boat, when Jesus and Peter get into the boat, the wind ceases. Now, if you'll remember, last week, the citizens responded by saying, we've not seen anything like this in all of Israel. How did the story conclude tonight? What was the acknowledgement? This is from the apostles here. This is not, random Joes that were kind of tagging along, not the people that have been sent away, but this is from Jesus's closest companions. How did they respond? What acknowledgement did they provide? 33 says, truly you are the Son of God. They recognized it. I think they've recognized it before, but they recognized it again. But sometimes we have to recognize things and re-recognize things as well, right? You know, you've all seen those bulletin boards or those boards at churches that say, if God feels far away, who moved, or something like that. And the point is you've kind of moved away. But sometimes we go through these things that do sort of pull us, right? And we have to realize, like, oh, wait, this truly is the Son of God. I need to get back over to this way just a little bit. Because we will yo-yo just a little bit. But it's we should have that recognition that the apostles had and sort of pull closer to it. Yes. Other than Peter's mother-in-law, we've really not seen anything that affected them personally, their lives. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. Absolutely. Other thoughts on this? Sure. Sure. Right. Right. Obviously a different scenario than what they would have normally been in. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're exactly right. There's been some comparison through these miracles to like the Jewish teachers. Well, our guy can do some stuff that their guys couldn't do. But you're right, Ben. This maybe is a step sort of beyond that with this. Let's go a few things to sort of go home with. Well, this is the invitation song that we'll sing here in just a few moments. But all the songs, I don't know if you paid attention to them or not, but they all were sort of related to the lesson that we had tonight. But we know the song. We'll sing the song here in a minute. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, right? Well, Peter sort of momentarily doubted. It happens in the change of one verse. 29, he's good. 30, he's not good. So it happens really quick. He doubted and lost faith that quick. Can that happen to us? It absolutely can. And so he calls for help. Who was there? Jesus was there to help him. We don't really have reason to doubt, but do we sometimes do it? Of course we do. But when we sort of recognize, like, I can't walk on the water, I can't do any of this without you, then essentially that's what we're saying, asking for Jesus. Can you pull in here and pull me up out of the water just like you did for Peter? Number 2. Well, James chapter 4 and verse 8 reads, when we draw near to God, he draws near to us, right? Well, I think one of the best things about sort of what Christianity is it's not forced on anybody. There's no requirement that you become a Christian. Nobody's going to make you do it. It's entirely our choice, right? So we have to move in that direction. But sometimes we sort of pull back from that direction. But we read there through James, if we can draw closer to God, then what's God going to do for us? He's going to draw closer to us as well. So we need to keep that in mind, just like we saw in our story. Number 3, what's the thing that can separate us? Sin can separate us, right? Sin separates us from God. Boo. You was talking about Isaiah. We read that. That's in Isaiah chapter 59 in verse 2, if you want an Old Testament. But the reason that we read what Jimmy read at the start, Romans 8, I wanted really just to focus on verses 38 and 39 to end. At the end, because Paul says that he's convinced that neither death nor life, angels, or principalities or powers, things present, things to come, I think it matches up good here, height, but also depth when you're thinking about water, nor any other created thing. What Paul is saying right there is, whatever, make something up, it's not going to do it. None of those shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. And that's what Paul says right there. The only thing that'll separate us is what Isaiah said. Sin will separate us. These other things, these other good things and bad things, we said, death or life. Well, that's going to affect all of us. Angels, we talked about that a few weeks ago with Isaac Hall, I think. Principalities, the government, all these things that we sometimes worry about, those things can't separate us from God. What's the one thing that can separate? Sin is. And we have to focus on that. We spend a lot of time on the ancillary and not near as much on the one thing that truly can separate us. If the whole world goes up in flames tonight, if our connection with God is right, that doesn't matter to us at all. But we probably spend a lot more time worrying about the world going up in flames than we do whether our relationship with God is right. Thoughts before we close up shop this evening? Right. Yep. Right. Right. And we've talked about this many times, but Peter is the sort of prototypical Christian. Peter goes through every kind of trial that you would go through. And Peter has all the highs and he has all the lows, and he says the stupid things and he says the smart things, and he makes the dumb moves and he gets in trouble and he has to get out. Sound familiar? He turns out awful good. And so that's the comforting part of it there as well. Anything else? Thank you all.